rebrands. I'm going to kind of talk about ones that have gone really poorly and got a lot of backlash, as well as ones that have landed very well. A lot of brands tend to misdiagnose poor or stagnant performance as a brand issue before doing the deeper work of investigating what's actually happening in the business. Nothing shakes someone's confidence more in your authenticity than a very hollow rebrand. Here's what I believe lays at the crux of most rebrand outrage. I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, Aves. Today, I have a really exciting sort of kickoff to a mini-series we're going to be doing about rebrands. At the end of last year, I was talking a lot about something that I'm calling the Omnipresent Brand Era, and this is how I'm referring to the sort of times and the type of brand interaction that we're currently in, where brand has integrated with our collective sense of self in a much more apparent and deeper way than ever before. My personal hypothesis is that we're at this moment in time when consumerism is reaching a near boiling point, but I do believe we've got a bit more sort of heating up to do. And I think people are still finding net new ways of intertwining their sense of self with the brands that they shop. So there's still room to go and sort of things to think about. I did a series at the end of last year about this move from millennial brand to omnipresent brand, and then a potential future move into more of a data-based brand. If you're interested in that, you can go check that out. But the reason that I bring up omnipresent brand today, because I think it actually leads very well into this conversation about rebrands. I figured it would be really fun to do this series now in January about different rebrands that have happened over the course of the last few years. Some that are maybe familiar to you, some that are maybe unfamiliar. I'm going to kind of talk about ones that have gone really poorly and got a lot of backlash, as well as ones that have landed very well. And then the third episode, which is what plugs in the most cleanly to this idea of omnipresent brand, in my opinion, is this weird uptick in content around a personal rebrand that I have seen in the last couple of years. It's really fascinating to me that people have taken this language, which has always been used to describe a business and a brand, and they're taking it to describe their own sort of personal journeys of growth. I think there are a lot of really implications. I love to read. I don't know if you knew that. I love to read and I love language. And so there are a lot of really interesting implications to people using the word rebrand, in my opinion. I'm not going to get into that until the third episode of this series, but I just wanted to kind of like level set a little bit because I feel like I will be using the term omnipresent brand as we talk about rebrand. Saying brand that many times in a row feels like criminal, but here we are. So obviously what is really interesting is that people have done this sort of act of a quote unquote personal rebrand around New Year's forever, right? Like resolutions, sort of like energetic shifts, manifestation. People have all their little different rituals that they do around the New Year. And what's really different is, like I mentioned, this focus less on what am I doing internally and more of an external rebrand is really, really fascinating. So again, we're going to do a 3-part series. Today, I really want to talk about, and I think I want to just start here because it's like the most fun and interesting, I think, for us all to discuss and remember, but I want to talk about rebrands and specifically 2 rebrands that received quite a bit of backlash and what could be behind that backlash and why I think part of this sort of omnipresent brand hypothesis plugs in directly to the idea of being like irate over a different logo on your favorite product. And then next week, like I mentioned, we'll talk about some of the more successful ones. And just because a rebrand has received a lot of backlash, I don't want to say that it's necessarily not successful. The first example I'm going to walk through was not successful. They ended up going back to their old brand. Pause here, try to guess what it is. I feel like it's happened a lot in the past couple of years that we've like rolled out a new logo and then gone back on it. But yeah, I wanted to say that as well, that just because there's backlash to something on the internet does not mean that it's not successful and that it didn't resonate with anyone. It just means that the people who didn't like it were a little bit louder. So I also want to share some high-level thoughts around the idea of rebranding your business before we get into some actual examples here. I think a lot of brands tend to misdiagnose poor or stagnant performance as a brand issue before doing the deeper work of investigating what's actually happening in the business. This is something that we look at a lot at Pilot House as part of our effort and agenda to really attach strategy to every single decision that is made. And a big part of how we think about strategy in terms of e-commerce is who are we actually talking to, and is the message resonating with that group of people? And so I think sometimes brands see that like poor or stagnant performance and they start to sort of spiral into this idea that like their brand in general is not going to work anymore. And I think more often than not, the problem is actually relevancy, which is more of an audience problem than anything. And it's a lot easier to fix a relevancy issue than it is to completely rebrand your business. Like that should go without saying. It's very simple. And that being said, sometimes as someone who has performed a lot of audits, your brand is totally bum. It sucks. It's not good. It's not worth holding on to. But most of the time, I do think it's more of a relevancy and audience issue than an actual brand issue. While I was prepping notes for this little series, I read that in the first 7 years of being in business, most brands do at least one rebrand, which is so bonkers to me. It's so much effort. And if you want to execute it well, it's so much effort. And if you actually want to make it count, it's so much effort. And like I mentioned, a lot of the times it's something else in the business that needs to be diagnosed as the issue before you need to look at a full rebrand. I'm going to start with an example that did not go so well and received a lot of backlash, which is the great tragedy of the little Cracker Barrel old man that they tried to do away with. I don't really know. I wasn't super familiar with Cracker Barrel before this became, for some reason, a scandal in the news. And I think that the quiet part that nobody tends to say out loud, but I will in this episode, is that with these very large companies, rebrands typically come from a place that has been so diluted down by stakeholders and different people who that decision has to pass through. And it's so isolated from real life and the actual people who make up those segments and personas. And I talk about authenticity a lot on this podcast. And I talk about authenticity in content and both authenticity in your brand as well. And nothing, I think, shakes someone's confidence more in your authenticity than a very hollow rebrand. I think that the problem the Cracker Barrel team was trying to solve, and of course I wasn't in the room, so I don't know, but I think the problem they were trying to solve by updating their logo to a weird, bland, boring piece of text, it was never going to be solved with that tool, which is that language I was using before, diagnosing what the actual issue is before you do a rebrand. It's why that's so important, because most likely the Cracker Barrel exec team, they were sitting around having a conversation that was in essence more about relevancy than it was about brand. What they probably wanted, what the end state goal would have been, was more feet heading into stores and more of those feet actually converting. And I try not to be too negative when we're talking about marketing or dissecting examples, because I think there's enough of that type of content out there already. It's a really easy cop-out, in my opinion, to just harp on what a brand has done. Anyone can shoot down a marketing decision, but can you actually execute something better? Usually not. So while the dog piling of Cracker Barrel was a little bit silly to me then, and it still is now, I think it does give us something really interesting to chew on, and it does loop back into that omnipresent brand theory, which is that people take it really seriously when we begin to alter and tinker with the brands that have come to hold up their identity. I think especially a brand like Cracker Barrel represents a lot to people, especially in America. It really ties into like their actual national identity in a way. So instead, what Cracker Barrel could have done was dive into segmentation, dive into like persona-based strategies, and really understand who they wanted to start bringing into the fold and into their stores, and how to simultaneously address those people, their needs, their wants, storytell from their point of view, while not completely isolating their existing audience. And the thing that's really interesting about rebrands with these big legacy brands is that like the existing pool of people is already so large, and they've already bought into the brand, and they have continued to do so for a very long time. So it makes sense with these legacy brands that if you want to bring in someone who is maybe a newer persona within your segmentation, or even a totally new segment of people, you have to think about how to do it respectfully and not damage your pre-existing relationship with the people who have really like held up your business for many, many years. I feel like the old like misstep on a legacy brand rebrand is kind of a tale as old as time at this point. And so that's why I wanted to bring in this second example today if we're talking about backlash to rebrands, which is a brand that I was actually unfamiliar with until a couple of weeks ago, which is a body care brand called Tree Hut. Tree Hut is like a really basic, plain body care brand. So they sell the usual suspects in the category. So like body butters and lotions, shower gel, body mists, and they're particularly well known for their body scrubs. They are sold in big box stores at a incredibly affordable price point, and they launched, I read, in 2002, and from what I could find, have been doing upwards of 200 million in sales annually, and that's in USD. In late December 2025, so just a couple weeks ago, they announced a rebrand, and this is very important, I'm going to say it, not a reformulation of their products, but just a rebrand. They're not changing what's inside, just on the outside. And when launching this rebrand, they also launched some new products to their sort of core lineup, including a daily body scrub. And this is a product that I guess people have sort of been asking for a while now. And this is where things started to get really interesting to me, because obviously this is my job. So brand and marketing is of interest to me. And so when I saw some backlash started to pop up about this body care brand, I started researching, digging into it. And what's so interesting is that it seems like people have been asking for this daily body scrub for sort of quite some time. It's been like a popular request. And I've talked about looping product development into your customer feedback and your customer engagement models. I think they did a really good job of doing that. But the comments I saw on the like content that they put on organic channels announcing this new product alongside new logos and new branding, long-time customers were commenting that they were never going to buy this. They're never going to try it because they just detest the font of the new logo so much. Like if you go to their organic channels right now and check out their content and check out the comments, they are full of people complaining about the rebrand and the packaging. And like I mentioned, swearing off the product itself, which is completely insane to me because of some changes made to the label. And some of these comments as well, is worth saying, are racking up like thousands of likes. Like it does feel like people overwhelmingly do not like what the new logo and branding looks or feels like. And I would encourage you to look it up. I'll post it on my LinkedIn. The difference, it is different, but it's not like insane. They haven't done anything like really offensive. The new branding, in my opinion, I think it's sort of a needed update. The original was very sort of 2002 in a fun way, I think, but not everyone's jam. And their new branding is really playful and really fun. And I think it does speak to their core audience. But people are, like I said, they're like personally hurt by this change. And so it got me really interested in like adding this Tree Hut story into this episode and researching a little bit, because I was really, truly perplexed by this reaction. Like My best friend, her name is Sierra. She does not listen to this podcast because she says it's quote unquote weird to listen to. But if she got a new haircut and started wearing different clothes, I would not stop being her friend. I would like her just as much. Like it is what is on the inside that makes me love to hang out with my friend Sierra. She's very funny. She's very silly. And you can tell I'm telling the truth because, like I mentioned, she does not listen to this podcast. She'll never hear this. So it's like really confusing to me that people who are such loyalists of the brand are so upset by this. So like I said, I got really interested and I started researching. And from what I can see and sort of analyze, and again, I'm not within the fold of a Tree Hut customer or within the marketing team over at Tree Hut, but they have not executed this rebrand in a way that should isolate their base this intensely. Which, sometimes, like we just mentioned, quickly running through Cracker Barrel, that was a bad rebrand. It didn't make any sense. And it was like, why would you do away with like a sweet old man on your logo for something really boring? It was just weird. It didn't really match like who they actually are or what they're even looking to become. And it was just bad. But like I mentioned, the Tree Hut packaging, it's brighter, it's more playful, and I think it's like more indicative of the actual audience purchasing these products than their previous branding. And so again, I have been stunted reading, like I mentioned before, they sell their products at a very low price point, especially in their category. And what has happened, from what I can tell from my research, is that they've gained a lot of momentum. They've always been kind of a cult brand and stand out in the category in these big box stores, but they've gained a lot of momentum recently on TikTok, especially with the idea of like an everything shower, because they sort of sell different products and you can really kind of like encapsulate every step of a really nice, luxurious shower experience for yourself within the products that they offer already. So they gained a lot of momentum with the idea of an everything shower sort of becoming popular through TikTok. But these are like $10 body scrubs and you get quite a bit of product. I feel like if I said that information to like my dad, he wouldn't understand it. So I'll break it down. That is a really good deal. That is a really good price. That is like incredibly cheap. Cheap as chips. That is something my dad would understand. So there's like these $10 body scrubs with scents like vanilla and coconut and something called Tropical Glow. And those are their best sellers. So it feels to me, and probably to you as well, that like a little extra whimsy and color on the packaging and a wavy little font isn't going to be the end of the world. So I did more digging and creeping, and I was looking on Reddit threads. Shout out to reading Reddit threads about products, both for the purpose of this podcast, but I also love doing it if I'm going to buy something. Reddit is the last truthful place on the internet, although sometimes it is scary. But anyway, I was reading Reddit threads about this body care line, and I watched reviews on like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, people who have like bought thousands of dollars worth of these very like low AOV products. And like people seem to love this product because it is fun, and they also seem to love it because it is affordable and you can really, really stock up your shower. So if you're someone who likes to borderline hoard beauty products, you can buy and fill a whole closet worth of this stuff. And I did see a lot of that content where we featured like a real excess of each different product in the shower. They have like a large variety of scents. They're putting out new ones. They've got seasonal variations, which is super common in the space, and super common when people are like cult fans of a brand like this to want to buy all of them. But it's so interesting to see people with like lines and lines of these body scrubs in their shower, and like, again, that weird, delicate dance of something being a brand and a company and an entity that exists to sell you something, but making it so much part of your life that like you are slammed with this logo day in and day out when you shower every day is a little bit bombastic and an experience that I am not like super, I guess, familiar with. And so that is when I really started to, I think, understand a bit more about how my hypotheses around omnipresent brand might be playing out in real time with this Tree Hut rebrand and their, I think, undeserved backlash. Because most of the time when I have been sort of ruminating on this idea of the omnipresent brand and what it means for people to be so deeply entrenched in conformity and community through consumerism, I have often only associated this idea with higher AOV and more luxury brands, meaning the highlighted through lines that I have seen have all been through this idea of perceived wealth and status. I saw a really interesting creator. I did not prep to say this and I cannot remember his name, but he was mentioning that the CEO of Starbucks and a barista at Starbucks could own the same iPhone, and they probably do own the same iPhone, but they make a much different salary. And that is really interesting, and I think that is where some of that omnipresent brand stuff starts to come in, because the lines between appearing rich and appearing wealthy have really vanished in a lot of ways, and there's so much importance put on this with things like an old money aesthetic trending and this like weird constant repetition that real wealth whispers, and this is how to dress like you are much wealthier and belong to a much different social circle than you do. I think it's so interesting that, again, it's not actually technically achievable, but in some situations, like the iPhone is a great example where it is. So it's like, if I can purchase my way into this brand, then I will have the illusion of status and wealth. And that is what I've been leaning on a lot when I've been thinking about this idea of omnipresent brand and thinking about why people are moving towards this way of thinking and how we sort of got here. A lot of, like I mentioned, my previous thoughts and ruminations were around how purchasing and belonging to a group that buys a brand, it does unlock a level of status in some social circles. And so that, again, added this layer of perplexity to Tree Hut because, like I mentioned, it's a $10 body scrub, and that's not a lot of money. It's like really affordable in the category itself. And even when you are examining the category within the confines of sort of big box stores and like pharmacy brands, it's still incredibly affordable. So why the outrage? Because it's not like a different logo in your video is really going to change anyone's perception. And I have seen that come up quite a bit when people are complaining about the rebrand and the new look of Tree Hut, that it looks cheap. And this has been fascinating to dive into because it is cheap, like I mentioned, and cheap isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just a really interesting thing to say when there's no price change and the product itself is not changing. What you're getting inside the container is not changing. What does it matter if the sticker put on the outside looks a little bit different? So again, this is why I've thought about this so much, because this is not a brand that fit into any of my assumptions that would drive, such a intense outrage around a rebrand that is so little. Again, Cracker Barrel makes sense because it is part of a larger cultural identity. But again, this is just a little old, you can buy it at the supermarket body scrub. And as far as I can tell, Tree Hut, sort of catapulted by TikTok relevancy, has become a different form of status symbol, which I think is really interesting. I think that there probably is a slightly older demographic of people who have been buying Tree Hut for a long time and genuinely can't be asked to care about what their body scrub looks like that they buy from Target. I think they just care about what's on the inside. But there's this, like I said, relatively new audience that they've captured through some really great strategy and work done, especially on organic social. And I think that it's mostly these folks who are very online, to say it politely, who have been driving this outrage behind the actual rebrand. And here's the thing, here's what I really, after sort of thinking about this over the break and putting together this episode, here's what I believe lays at the crux of most rebrand outrage, and Tree Hut is not excluded from this. I think people need content that performs, and being angry is the easiest point of entry to get engagement. It is no secret. Everybody knows. It's very corny. It's very common. I have observed a lot of Tree Hut fans speaking up in defense of the brand and saying that they don't mind it. And you do see the occasional positive comment. Nobody's super for the rebrand, because that would be kind of weird, right? It's like, you don't need to make a long video, but I have seen people say they don't mind it, or they in fact like it. They think it's really fun. And I think one other really interesting note in all of this Tree Hut drama that I have observed is this repeated almost rumor of shrinkflation, which is a term people use to describe products staying the same price, but you receive less of the product itself. And I've seen this really interesting narrative start to play out where people are saying that the Tree Hut scrubs that have just come out contain less product and they're more expensive. But as I mentioned previously, Tree Hut launched a net new product, which is the Daily Body Scrub. By the way, it is crazy to know so much now about this brand. I'm currently living in Australia, and I think I'm gonna get some just to try it because I've been researching so much. This did happen one time. Side note, with a Coach bag, I was researching Coach's organic social strategy, and I influenced myself into buying the Lana, which is the greatest office bag that I have ever owned in my life. It fits so much. It fits my laptop. It fits my iPad. It fits all my little weird stuff that I like to bring when I go to the office, my water bottle, everything. But that is neither here nor there. I do think because I've been so just in the world of Tree Hut, I'm just going to try it. I'm just going to give it a try at some point. If it gives me a rash because I have sensitive skin, whatever, it's worth it. But anyway, they launched that new product. And so their best seller, which is the scrub that comes in this sort of square container, is not changing dimensions at all. Nothing is shifting about that packaging other than the sticker put on it and the font used on the plastic container. Everything else is remaining the same. It's the new body scrub that comes in this more rounded container. And that is what people have been up in arms about, claiming that the rebrand is just an effort to give them less product for more money. And I think it's really interesting that it's just not the reality of the situation. And what, again, I find really interesting is how quick folks have been to do such a 180 on a brand that they seem to love so deeply, and to just decide, no, I'm never buying this again based on something that's incorrect. And also a font that I don't like. It's all a little bit absurd, but that part was really interesting to me to see a false narrative start to circulate about the brand, which if that is what they've done, that's not cool. Nobody's into that. Do not agree with that, but that's not what they've done. It's pretty easy to do your research and look at the website or look at the aisle in the supermarket and see that they are two very different products, and so they might cost a different amount. And I think I wanted to point these things out and sort of spend so much time dissecting what has happened recently with Tree Hut, because from my perspective, I said this before, their rebrand was executed very well, and I think that it does actually speak to their core. And like I mentioned, you do see people saying that they don't mind it and they don't understand why everyone is so upset about it. Like I said, people like to be angry. It gets engagement, and if you were buying Tree Hut products originally to get engagement and kind of stacking up your shelves with them, people will probably engage with content where you're trashing them for any sort of shift. That's just how the world works on TikTok and other platforms. But yeah, it's so interesting to see people in the comments who aren't necessarily making content and profiting off that content. Those people in the comments are the ones that really interested me while I was researching this episode, and I found particularly fascinating because they have no reason to be upset other than they just are, which is valid. You can feel your feelings, but it does feel very disproportional. And so that's why I wanted to really dive into it, because I think it illustrates a really good point, which is if say 15 years ago, which I know is light years over half of my life, and a big box store at that point in time did a body care rebrand, nobody would have batted an eye, I don't think. Some people might not have been able to find it. They might have talked about it with their in-person social circles and just say, hey, did you see the new Tree Hut logo? Yeah, it's kind of cute. I like it. But nobody would have cared. Even the diehard fans who were stockpiling stuff back then probably wouldn't have cared. And I think part of that is we weren't showing off our body care routines, so we didn't really care what it would look like back then. But I just think it was a different culture. I talked about this a little bit in my original episode about sort of the dangers of an omnipresent brand era from a consumer point of view. And I think one of those dangers, the biggest one in my opinion, is that we stop really caring about what is inside the container, and that's what really matters. I don't think I personally would be a fan of this product, even though I know I just said I might buy it and try it out. I don't like a sugar-based scrub. I really like a chemical-based body scrub. And I know I'm plugging so many products in the pod today, but I really like the one that's by like the Necessaire. I think it's like you pronounce it French. I don't know. You only use it twice a week. I really like that one. It has a great scent. I'm not crazy about a sugar scrub, but if you do like a sugar scrub and you would like the way that it feels on your skin, it's like the label and the way that the brand chooses to present itself, especially when it's such a small lateral step, shouldn't stop you from enjoying what's actually inside it. And so I think it's a really interesting example and case study in both a rebrand and also the dangers of the omnipresent brand era, both from a consumer point of view, but also from a brand point of view, because brands are not meant to operate as people. They're not meant to hold so much weight in people's lives and their hearts. They're meant to be brands. They're meant to be fun. They're meant to be playful. They're meant to put out cheeky marketing, but they're not meant to hold so much of who you are as a container. I think that's when it gets, again, dangerous for people on both sides, both brand and consumers, because it's just not the relationship that is supposed to exist. And I have mentioned this previously on the pod, but I did get my start in the world of sort of communications and marketing with like 10 years of political strategy experience. So best believe me when I say I know all publicity is good publicity. I know spin. I know lots of brands are probably sometimes partaking in outrageous rebrands just to get attention, because some attention, even if it's mostly negative, is better than no attention, especially if you're in a bit of a downwards tailspin from a performance point of view. But there is something especially insidious about the way that people react to rebrands and the spreading of misinformation, like the sort of shrinkflation-based claims about Tree Hut. It's not the same as it was before. And like I mentioned, you don't have to tell me. I know if people are talking, that's a good thing. But it does get into this weird arena of seeing the spreading of like falsehoods and this pure outrage. And it feels just a little bit silly. I feel like I've used that word a lot. It's a little bit silly because, again, the priority should be more on what is actually inside the vessel and what are we selling to people in terms of a more practical and use case based scenario, rather than what does the logo look like and does every single person who buys our product like it. It's not that important. I am someone who believes that everything is that deep, but this is one of those situations where it's like, it's not that deep at all. And yeah, so I wanted to start by talking about Cracker Barrel today and then Tree Hut, because I think they exist on the same spectrum in that they both received, I think, a goofy amount of backlash for something that at the end of the day, it's like what a brand looks like. Go outside. But I do think they are great examples of a really poorly thought out and executed rebrand, which would be Cracker Barrel. I don't think that was necessary. Like, truly, my professional opinion, I don't think it was necessary. I don't think it was ever going to do a lick of good. And again, if people are talking, that's a good thing no matter what they're saying. But I think it probably wasted a lot of money and time. And like I mentioned when I was talking about sort of Cracker Barrel and what they were probably trying to solve at the beginning, I think like really deeply thinking about segmentation and personas and how to build relevancy for the people they wanted to walk through the door, their time and money would have been much better spent there than like cycling out new signs and then taking them down and just reinstating that kind-looking old man who's part of their logo. And then, like I mentioned before, I think Tree Hut executed a very self-assured rebrand, one that should have worked a lot better. And like I mentioned, I think if like 10, 15 years ago this had happened, nobody would have cared. People probably would have maybe even celebrated it. There might have been a positive post, but those are not the times we're living in. People are so deeply entrenched in the brands that they consume that a shift in that brand, I think, feels very insecure for a lot of people these days. All that being said, I think it's important to sort of go back to what I was saying about rebrands before I got into these examples, which is sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes your brand is bum, dude. And it does not really resonate at all with the people that you want it to resonate with, or anyone. Sometimes, again, like, I am unfortunately thinking of some examples because, like I mentioned, I have audited a lot of brands, and sometimes the branding is just weird and bad and off, and you do need a rebrand. But a lot of the times I think people pull that lever because it feels like it's going to do something that it's not. But if you already can't figure out how to make your product relevant to people and how to make it resonate with your target audience, your personas, then you have a much bigger problem. And that's always not necessarily tied to your brand. Sometimes, like I mentioned, changing the packaging, it's something, and it does matter. I don't want to like undersell how important brand is, because I think brand is very important. I do want to hit home the idea that like what the actual product does and how it adds to someone's life and how you market around that is much more important and skillful than really specific parts of the brand and how the logo looks. I hope that was helpful. If you're thinking of doing a rebrand, watch out now. If you're thinking of doing a rebrand and now you're thinking, I don't know if this is for me, I don't really know what the best next steps are, head over to the Pilot House website and fill out a lead form and we can chat directly. I mentioned this before, but we tie strategy into every facet of what we do at Pilot House. So how that has played out in my experience and what I've seen is that sometimes it stops you from walking the plank a little bit when you are thinking at a higher strategic level. It stops you from making almost irrational decisions, especially when it comes to brand, and it really focuses you in on what are the actions that need to be taken and what is the first step to taking them. I think it's a really, and obviously I'm biased, this is the way that I work, it's a really smart way to work because, like I mentioned, it stops you from walking the plank a little bit. And I mentioned this with the Cracker Barrel example. You waste time and money when you do a rebrand like this. And I think the first step should always be diagnosing what the actual problem is and figuring out how to best meet that goal. And strategy is the number one way to do that. That's it. That was a really fun episode. I feel like it's always really funny to talk about like internet haters and trolls because I really am not about it, but it's so fascinating to see every single time. It's so interesting. Next week, it's going to be a little bit more positive. We're going to chat about some rebrands that worked out really well and ended up strengthening a brand's relationship with their core base. And that will be a little more light for me to record and prepare, a little bit more fun. I'm not going to read any more Tree Hut hate comments. If you work at Tree Hut, mad respect for keeping your comments on. And I think that the logo looks fine. It's cute. It's all good. Like in like 3 months, it'll be like Innisfree. Like no one will really think about it or talk about it. But yeah, that was the episode for today. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.